Thank you. Okay, so hey, good afternoon and welcome to CAR's Public Affairs Group Property Rights Luncheon. The Public Affairs Master Group, commonly known as the PAG, deals with many aspects of the association that involve public policy. Each year, the members of this group, this volunteer group, select a topic of importance to the realtor community and how it relates to property rights. This year's topic, short-term rentals, is important in every one of our localities, and each of our localities regulate differently. I think we can agree that from today's attendance, it speaks to the importance of this topic. We'd like to thank the members of the PAG for putting this together. So if you are a member of the PAG, would you please stand and be recognized? Thank you, if you'd help. We're also thrilled to have Free Enterprise Forum President and CAR Staff Liaison to the Public Affairs Group, Neil Williamson, here today to moderate our session. Known throughout Central Virginia for his seats available social media posts from our sparsely attended local government meetings, Neil has served as CAR's Government Affairs Director for over 17 years. As managing editor of the Free Enterprise Forum blog, Neil regularly challenges local governments, businesses, and citizens to expand their vision and consider the consequences of their actions. Often quoted as a voice in favor of economic freedom, Neil has been a guest lecturer at the University of Virginia and an adjunct faculty member at Piedmont, Virginia Community College. He's a regular voice on several local radio programs commenting on local growth and development issues. And if you would, help me welcome Neil Williamson to the stage.
What a great turnout. Welcome to the Hillsdale Conference Center. This is just, every time I have the opportunity to have an event here, I'm just thrilled that CAR's made the investment in this space and how much we are able to utilize it and have the community utilize it. The facilities are back this way if you need the bathroom facilities, and fire exits are here and there, along with a lovely patio. Before I bring up our speakers, I'm gonna give you a PowerPoint. Don't worry, there are 48 slides. No, there are 4 slides, 4 slides. There will only be 4 slides today, and this is number 1. So I just wanted to touch on what the market kind of looks like from here looking out. We have speakers today that will be speaking of different markets and the national market. I'm really excited about our panel, but let me go ahead and get started because I'm not the star of this show. Number 1, 5 national short-term rental market trends. These were put out in February. More people are booking short-term rentals in natural settings. Airbnb demand is shifting away from big cities to smaller short-term rental markets. That speaks to Charlottesville to some extent. More travelers want to see the great outdoors. They're booking stays near national parks. Travelers are booking longer stays. You saw this especially during COVID. I was speaking to a table at a local restaurant, and they were teachers, and they were teaching online, and they had Marriott points or whatever, and they were staying up at a Blue Green resort, and they just did that every 2 or 3 months. They lived this nomadic lifestyle and taught from wherever they were as long as they had a good broadband connection. Travelers are booking longer stays, and big cities are welcoming travelers who stay longer. Looking forward, the US and Virginia short-term rental market, the AirDNA, which is a research site for short-term rentals, in June forecast that this year short-term rental will earn $63 billion across the United States. That's huge. Virginia, specifically, I spoke with some folks from VTC, short-term rental supply is increasing. You saw, I think it was Nova and Hampton Roads account for about 46% of the short-term rental growth in the state over the last year. With that, the average daily rate, this is the ADR, as they say in the industry, is actually coming down a little bit because supply is moving up, especially in those markets where they have that increased supply. Short-term rentals are big in Central Virginia, Nova, and Virginia Beach. If you put those three markets together, that's 2/3 of Virginia's short-term rentals. 1/5 of the short-term rentals are here in Central Virginia, including Richmond. I'll show you in the next map. The last map showed it. Central Virginia for this includes Richmond. It's the way VTC does it. I can't explain it. Counterintuitive to me, more stays, STR stays are outside city limits. So there are more STRs located outside Richmond and Charlottesville than within those markets combined. This contrasts the hotel markets. Hotels dominate the cities, according to VTC. And the demand continues to increase. Post-pandemic, short-term rental demand has increased across Central Virginia, as has supply. Richmond had the highest demand increase of 31.6%. Now, I love data. I can't help it. And so I pulled this yesterday because, you know, I like fresh data. You don't want that stale stuff. So this is fresh data from the Air DNA results. They're only as good as, I don't work in this market, but this seemed to be a reputable source based on some cross-checking. Of this, you can see the top property managers: Casimir Club, Stay Charlottesville, which is one of our speakers, Evolve, and Vacay Away Vacation Rentals for the central. This is for Charlottesville market. Occupancy rate of 70%. Was surprised. I looked at this data again this morning. 86% of these rentals projected are whole house stays. Just think about that. That surprised me a great deal. But that's the end of the PowerPoint that you have to sit through today, which is good. I'm going to ask our speakers to come on up to the stage, and I'm going to invite them to come and take your seats wherever, and we're going to have them speak a little bit each. I'm going to introduce each one, have them speak, then introduce the next, and move on through, and then we'll have our question and answer. I am always surprised, I guess amazed is probably a better word, at the depth of knowledge in our local realtor community. Travis Wilburn is a former realtor, member of CAR, and currently the managing partner and founder of the Stay Charlottesville Management Group, a portfolio of tourism and hospitality-related businesses in the greater Charlottesville area. He also serves as the founder of Blue Cedar Partners, working with vacation rental managers to help them thrive in an ever-changing industry. When he's not jetting the globe, supporting far-flung short-term rental clients, Travis can be seen around Charlottesville, soaking up the local scene. True to his fun, competitive nature, he plans to one day open a 28-room boutique inn right next to his business partner's 24-room hotel. A tourism and hospitality professional, he loves nothing more than showcasing Charlottesville by introducing guests to the finest homes in this area, as well as the other best-in-class tourism partners. In addition to his hospitality work, Travis also serves as a board member for the Tom Tom Foundation. Please give a CAR welcome to Travis Wilburn.
I think it is on. Perfect. So I can't sit and talk.
Okay.
Apologize. So also, thank you so much for having me. This is a great honor. It's a huge opportunity to speak to you guys. I'm actually still currently involved in real estate, still have a real estate license. I also just flew back from Nashville last night late, where I attended one of the larger short-term rental conferences in our space. And so I apologize for my voice, but I barely could talk yesterday. I've been drinking hot coffee all day, trying to get that back. So the first thing I have to do, by the way, Neil, I can't believe that you actually have some of that data that we just went over yesterday. One of the most amazing things to me is that you were talking about 63 billion in 2023, and in 2018, that is $30 billion of revenue. It has nearly doubled in the last 4 years. But before I get into some of the topics here, I've got to help make sure that we understand the last 10 years. Has anybody in this room ever booked a plane ticket on kayak? Raise your hand. Awesome. Now, has anybody in this room ever flown on a kayak? Perfect. Just making sure. Kayak represents a lot of great airlines. And I imagine if one of those airlines was actually failing miserably and crashing every other week, they probably would not allow it on their platform. Just a thought. Now, I just saw how many listings I had on from AirDNA, which is 25 listings. I actually represent 65 listings in this market that are mostly on staycharlottesville.com. One of the biggest problems in the vacation rental industry that we're facing right now is I represent a lot of great properties. For instance, like Ben Coolin Estate, which is in Albemarle County, which is legally licensed. You know how many times it's booked on VRBO or Airbnb in 3 or 4 years? 0. And this is the reason why. So Airbnb started off in 2008. And really what they did is actually figured out how to be a credit card processor. And so Airbnb wanted to make money, and they wanted to make sure that the booking was internal into their system. They wanted to make sure that there was no slippage. Slippage means that they find out who I am and they book directly with me. They were losing money if that actually happens. So what did Airbnb do? Airbnb made sure that it was impossible to find me and that they kept it within the platform. So that if I booked directly through Airbnb as a guest, if I put my property on Airbnb as a supply and then I have a guest, I would have no communication with that person until they check in, which is a huge problem because Airbnb wanted to make money. They didn't care about taxes, sales tax, TOT tax. They didn't care about registrations. They were doing it very unprofessionally until they realized that they had to change their game. They actually did change their game. I think it's kind of funny. In 2015, they were known as the couch surfing group. They wanted to try to validate themselves. So suddenly Beyonce during the Super Bowl was staying in a $10,000 a night Airbnb in San Francisco. Now Beyonce made a couple $1 million staying in that Airbnb, but they started slowly shifting their platform. They also tried that with Britney Spears. I'll have you know, it did not actually work out. Britney Spears got canned. Vacation rentals are one of the original hospitality opportunities within this country before hotels. The one thing I know about real estate, it's cyclical. It's been coming back. Everything shifts in our industry. And vacation rentals currently right now have the exact same demand as the hotel world. Now, it's equaled out for 2022. However, in March of 2020, there's this thing that called COVID. I don't know if anybody read about it. It happened. Suddenly hotels were disappearing from the market. And in May of 2020, vacation rentals went like this. It spiked huge. Some of the data that you were talking about, people wanted to get out. They wanted to get out from their urban markets. They didn't want to stay in an 800 square foot apartment. They wanted a large house to be with their family so that they could work from home. Now that has actually shifted back. The demand, again, for hotels and vacation rentals are completely almost on the same line right now. What does that mean? Does anybody know what the #2 largest industry in Charlottesville is? Anybody know what the #1 largest industry in Charlottesville is? University of Virginia. #2 is tourism. Our market has completely shifted in the last 15 years. I remember in 2008 when we were talking about wineries becoming a big thing, and Oak and Croft was one of the big wineries. It's like, oh, Charlottesville's going to get known. Well, it's happened. Weddings, #2 in the Southeast, back behind Charleston, and wineries. It is a huge, important part of our economy. Charlottesville, Neil kind of represented this. We've seen across the country a shift in regards to demand in a lot of markets. However, Charlottesville is in still the top 5% of highest demand throughout the United States, which is pretty impressive. That comes straight from Rita McClellan and Virginia Tourism Board. The Regulations. So it's complicated. It's quite complicated. And this is why I'm so appreciative, because if I had a real estate agent, if I had $1 for every real estate agent that has called trying to help me interpret the regulations that I need a couple attorneys often to help interpret, I'd have a lot of money. The first thing is you guys got a sheet right here. Just want to make sure that we correct this. And this is to no fault of anybody, but it says Albemarle County occupancy tax is 5%. It is not. It is 8%. It got effective July 1st. One of the most important things I talk about in our industry is people getting properly licensed to do what they're doing, which means it's different in every market in this area, has different parameters, but there's TOT tax. First thing to know is TOT tax is taxed on anything less than 30 days. Anytime you have a property rental that is less than 30 days, you have to pay TOT tax. Anytime you have a rental less than 90 days, you have to pay sales tax, which is 5.3%. And on top of that, you have to pay that tax on every single dollar that you earn. So there's been a common misconception. And unfortunately, I love sharing this story because in 2015, Virginia came to audit me. I was like, heck yeah, I got my books. And they went through everything as they like to do. And then they saw my cleaning fee, which is a service. And I'm like, oh, no, it's not a service. I was like, well, we've already been through this. I went through this 5 years ago. And they're like, well, where's your paperwork? I'm like, oh. So I paid a very large check to the state of Virginia for not collecting 5.3% sales tax on cleaning fees. So if you're talking to your clients and talking to them about vacation rentals, you need to tax everything. Every single dollar that comes through that booking has to be taxed. Occupancy tax, as well as the state sales tax. Secondly, one of my most important things to also know, and we were just talking about this, some of you guys might remember there's a gentleman named Lim Marshall who used to be the attorney for Virginia Association of Realtors. You guys sign contracts to do purchase agreements, and there's an early occupancy rule, right? So if somebody needs to close on August 15th, but they're going to take early occupancy on August 1, do you guys know what you're signing up for? A license agreement. We are not leasing properties. We are not involved in leasing properties. And the separation of what makes it a licensing agreement versus a lease agreement is who's paying the utilities. I, as the owner, am always paying the utilities. I sign a license agreement over to our guest, and they have to adhere to certain rules. Now, that license agreement is the same thing as you using Gmail. You're signing up for a license to abide by their rules, right? And so they're very important to know because there's a lot of regulations that are being created aimed at neighborhoods where they say, oh, short-term rentals are allowed. There's no description about the 30-day mark or not. That less than 30 days, you're like, oh, it doesn't say anything about it. However, generally in most modern HOAs that I see, it says in the back of it, you're not able to license your property. And that is exactly what you're doing by definition in the state of Virginia. You are licensing your property. So if you're telling somebody to buy a short-term rental in a neighborhood, read that HOA very, very carefully. Most likely you're not in compliance. Now, I am not a lawyer. I need to disclose that. Neil told me that. So you got to be protected, but check with your attorneys. It takes a lot of attorneys to interpret some of these rules right now. Talking about regulation. So one of the biggest problems throughout the country right now is that we're facing regulations in the vacation rental space because of the lack of understanding of what vacation rentals are. Most people notoriously think that they are Airbnbs. And again, if somebody comes and stays at Ben Coolin, they go back to their respective cities with 9 of their friends, they all say that they just stayed in the coolest Airbnb in Charlottesville, though it had absolutely nothing to do with Airbnb. So the first thing is making sure that we know as a group that there's a separation of a lot of different companies and businesses. And the common theme of that Nashville conference, which had a lot to do with professional vacation rental folks that have been around since the beginning of the country, is that we are not Airbnb. I want you to hear that. It's like Airbnb is a great platform if you respect it, but Airbnb is trying to quickly get into compliance because they've got a lot of arrows and a lot of money to lose. Let's see here. So do you want me to talk about regulations throughout the US or come back to
We'll
it?
come back to it. That'd
All right.
be great.
Perfect.
Thank you. Stage prop. Okay. As many of you know, I'm the father of not one, but two fabulous William and Mary alumni. I am pleased to welcome another member of the Tribe family to the stage today, Albemarle Senior Planner 2, Leah Brumfield. In addition to her studies in Billyburg, Leah was part of the Sustainable Development Environmental Seminar at American University and received her Master of Urban and Environmental Planning from the University of Virginia. She has work experience in both the private and public sectors. She has been with Albemarle County for over 5 years. As the lead planner for Albemarle's homestay ordinance, Leah regularly presents variances and special exceptions to the Board of Supervisors. There is literally no one who understands the motives, the intent, and the letter of Albemarle County Code more than Leah Brumfield. Please give a car welcome to Leah.
Thanks so much. Thanks to Neil. Thanks to everybody for having us here. And while what Neil has said may be true, unfortunately today I will not be speaking to the motives of anyone. We will only be speaking to the regulations. So also I want to give a thanks to Travis. He makes my job easier. He has been a huge driver in pushing people in the county and also in the city, but not my jurisdiction, to get regulated, to make sure that everything is above board, and to make the stays as least impactful as they possibly can. So also, I do want to just preempt before we get to the questions that unfortunately I am not on the taxation side, which I know is extremely important to a lot of your clients. And so I don't want to tell you the wrong thing. I can tell you what I know. Call the finance office. It's option 3 when you call them. That's the number that you want to get to. So the history of homestays in Albemarle is a long and convoluted one, and we are still on the journey there and back again. We have not finished yet. When the lore around it is that we created the bed and breakfast uses in the 70s when the Queen of England was traveling across the United States, and we did not have a use to permit all the people who wanted to come see her when she came to Charlottesville. So we created the bed and breakfast use. That went on for many years, created accessory tourist lodging. And then in August of 2019, we created the homestay use to kind of bring everything under one umbrella and create new regulations, avoiding some of the concerns. We have had a couple of bad actors who had fireworks shot off next to cattle farms at what was actually an Airbnb. So those were put into place. And then in April of this year, we had an adjustment after 2 years of going through the regulations and applying them. We made a couple of changes to our regulations to bring some things, open some things up to make opportunities for people to actually request some more uses. And the thing that I want everybody to understand about Albemarle County, at least, and I'm fairly certain this is the same in most municipalities, is that accessory tourist lodging, short-term rentals, they are accessory to a residential use. So that is the first thing that you're going to want to know for your clients. They're going to come in and say they want an investment property. They live in New York City. They live in DC. They want to buy a house in Albemarle and they want to rent it out. on any platform. And that is the thing that is the number one thing we're trying to avoid, actually. So short-term rentals are allowed. Short-term rental as a independent hotel, not allowed. And that's kind of where, that's the foundation for everything that we're building on here is we want to keep residential neighborhoods. Everybody knows the market is insane, which is, I mean, good for commissions, but we are trying to keep houses semi-affordable. We're trying to avoid the skyrocketing prices that we have for smaller houses that are being fixed up beautifully and then rented out to short-term rentals 365 days a year. And so that's kind of the fear, and that's the concern, and that's what drives all of the Albemarle County regulations. And I know we have a lot of questions about that. I will give you a short, a couple of the highlights of things that you'd want to keep in mind when you're working with your clients, and something that you may have had questions about, which was that the ownership question of short-term rentals. Previously, we have separated out houses, properties in residential neighborhoods from rural area neighborhoods, which are the two zoning districts in the county. Rural area is forests, farms, single family houses, and it's 85% of the county, 95% of the county, on acreage. And most people do not live in the rural area, but that's where all the land is. And so in order to preserve those wide open spaces, we have regulations that limit the number of dwellings on an acre in the rural area. And then we have much denser acreage in the residential districts. So because of that, we separate them out. We treat them differently. In the rural area, previously, you were not allowed to have a short-term rental unless it was in your name. So Joe Schmo could own a house and rent out his basement apartment in the rural area. Joe Schmo LLC could not. As of April, when did we adopt that? Fairly recently. We made adjustments so that Joe Schmo LLC can ask the Board of Supervisors for a special exception to allow him to have that short-term rental. And the thing there is that a special exception is not, it's not by right. It is a legislative action. It goes to the board. They make that decision. But now we have the opportunity, at least, for him to ask, whereas previously it wasn't even on the table. Other things that we did change, just to keep in mind, we have setback requirements for homestays in order to not have a guest cottage that is 2 feet from your neighbor's property boundary. They have to be primary structure setbacks. In the rural area, we need trees between you and your neighbor, shielding it. And the LLCs and the resident manager question is something that comes up a lot, and it's hard to give a soundbite on. Resident manager is going to be someone who lives on the property and it takes care of it, is responsible for it, and the board can approve that on any property, rural or residential. But you have to ask them for it. So if you personally own the property and you do not live on it, but someone else does, you can ask the board for that special exception. Again, legislative action up to the board, not guaranteed. It depends on how good you are at turning in your paperwork.
The question was, how long does that take? And it depends how good you are at turning in your paperwork and
And
how
the board's
busy
schedule.
and
Yeah.
busy the board schedule is. 'Cause
So yeah, the special exception process, which is kind of, thank you, Travis, that's a good thing. Yeah, a homestay clearance application is less than $100, and that homestay clearance application goes through in a couple weeks.
And that's an administrative approval.
and that is an administrative approval. A special exception, which is any of the things that are legislative that go to the board has to make that decision. Those have to get scheduled on the board's agenda, which is one of my fun jobs, and fitting that in and negotiating with the clerk to make sure that there is room for the debates that will go on for these decisions, usually takes about 3 months to get on the board schedule.
90 days to get on the schedule.
Yeah, so, well, it's 90 days. I schedule it immediately, then it goes onto the board in 90 days. Yeah. So that's the timeline for that. And I'm sure you will have more questions, and hopefully I will leave here in one piece.
You will. Thank you. Thank you very much. You will leave in one piece, and I really appreciate you coming. And it's, I will tell you that when those exceptions come forward, they usually come forward in twos for whatever reason, and it's about an hour and a half of a board meeting. I know because I'm there with all my friends. Okay, moving on. Our last speaker is Kim McClellan. She's the Public Policy Director at the Fredericksburg Area Association of Realtors. She represents FAR in various community organizations and has established working relationships with many area officials. Kim is the person to contact with concerns about property rights, land use, and area agencies that deal with housing issues. She's a former Capitol Hill staffer and proud mom to Jack and Ellie. In her spare time, she enjoys spending time with her husband and children boating on Lake Anna. Kim and I have worked together for well over a decade, but never more closely than this spring, when CAR and FAR sent a joint letter to the Louisa County Board of Supervisors outlining our concern with their proposed and still proposed changes to their short-term rental regulations. Please welcome my friend, Kim McClellan.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, everybody. I'm very happy to be here in your beautiful conference space. And I feel like our region, Spotsylvania County, is what I'm going to talk about first. For those of you who are not familiar, we're a large county, but not that many people, right off of 95. And it's a very wide-ranging county. And I feel like we're kind of late to the short-term rental party. We just started talking about short-term rentals a year ago, which is kind of hard to believe because they've been around for a long time. But it just hadn't been an issue in our region. So Spotsylvania runs almost all the way from the city of Fredericksburg out to Lake Anna. And there's been concerns, especially as the lake has grown. You know, if we had this conversation 10 years ago, the lake was a very quiet place back then. Certainly there was still transaction happening, but it's been amazing to see the explosive growth in the last 5 or 6 years. My parents have owned property there for 10 years and they moved full time in 2016. And every time I head out there, it seems like every weekend there's a new foundation poured in their neighborhood. So it seems like this has kind of really ramped up in the last few years. And Spotsylvania had several concerns to start with. We had an agent call us. This is usually how this happens, is the phone rings and an agent says, the county is looking to stop whatever it is, or the county is looking to do something. And we got a little bit more into the details and discovered some of the concerns that the county had. Number one was the transient occupancy tax. That is something that for our property managers, and I think this is going to be echoed in the room if you do property management, they are collecting those fees. So we are very supportive of having a registry to bring everybody who's doing short-term rentals, property management, or on their own into compliance. There was some concern that if they're not applying the TOT, it might put the hotels at a competitive disadvantage. If you know Lake Anna, there are not any hotels at Lake Anna. No one is staying at exit 126 and enjoying the lake. So we didn't think that was a valid concern, but certainly bringing those folks on board to be paying that TOT is very important. Fire and rescue had concerns about occupancy. There were lots of anecdotal stories about them going into a property where a converted closet has, 4 bunk beds. That is not something that our property managers would allow to occur in properties they are managing. We are not supportive of turning places like that, rooms like that, into occupancy. So they don't want to have to roll up onto a scene that's a 2-bedroom house, but there's actually 15 people staying there. Certainly understand that. And then septic systems. This is obviously a huge thing for many people. You want a functioning septic system. And they were concerned about the impact of short-term rentals on septic systems. Unfortunately, I think when we were having this discussion, for people who own responsible property owners, this was a hard conversation to have about septic systems because we kept hearing the term failing septic system. That is a big term to use. If you have a failed septic system, that is a huge impact. And we could not identify we could not get any data from the health department or from the county supporting this idea that failing septic systems are causing the harmful algae blooms at the lake. We boat at Lake Anna every weekend. I also do not want to boat through scum and not be able to have my kids swim. This is a huge concern, and it's bad for the lake. People don't want to rent necessarily if they're going to read articles about the area around Lake Anna State Park constantly being closed. So we know this is a huge thing we have to tackle, but we felt like it was disingenuous to push short-term rental restrictions based on failing septic systems without any data. So we did write a letter of concern about that to the county, and also the occupancy limits. And I know this is one that is ripe for lots of discussion, and I'm interested to hear what you all say. But there are many, many, many people who have been renting their homes at Lake Anna for years. They've predicated their ownership on the ability to rent so that they can maintain their property and then maybe retire to it in the future. And they're very responsible homeowners. If we have occupancy of two people per home, 2 adults per room in a home, that could put people who have been following the rules for years instantly in violation of the law as soon as that's passed, because they have a couple sets of bunk beds for children. There are other places in the state that have an exemption for minor children. We thought that was a very reasonable approach to exempt under 14. Certainly we can be flexible on, negotiating that age. But to have a 2-bedroom house that suddenly a young couple and a baby and their grandparents can no longer legally rent that because they exceed the limit with a child in diapers, that just seemed a little bit excessive to us. And certainly to a lot of our property owners who are represented by property managers that, again, have been renting this way for years in full compliance with the law, focusing on already existing septic regulations on the books, that they have to have a 5-year pump out. We thought that there were ways to deal with this. Noise is another one that we heard about. Well, noise is already handled under the code. There's already opportunities. You can call the police if your neighbors have a noisy party. And then the other thing that we struggled with is my parents live at Lake Anna. We have a 4-bedroom house at Lake Anna. We regularly have 15 people at that house. All my siblings and their kids are all there at the same time. Our house would not be impacted by any of these rules, but our neighbors who rent would. What's the difference? You're making ownership for rental housing significantly more onerous than the owner-occupied properties, which we didn't think that was fair to put a much larger burden on owners of rental property. So Spotsylvania ended up not doing anything. They looked to their neighbors, and Louisa hadn't been talking about it yet. Orange County has a very small part of the lake, but they hadn't had anything either. So they ended up just passing a registry, which we were very supportive of. And had a lot of really great conversations. And it was a lot of discussion about some of these challenges when finding that balance. Certainly understand, again, my parents are full-time residents. We don't want to live next to a party house that has loud music all the time. That hasn't been the case for us in practice, but certainly there are places, that have irresponsible owners who don't necessarily put the right rules in place for their short-term rentals. So then we fast forwarded a year, and Neil and I have been working with Louisa County on this, and a very similar process. They had a very open process where lots and lots of homeowners, the meeting went to, I think, almost midnight, where they got lots of feedback. And I think we actually had two concerns with the Louisa County. One, occupancy, the same thing. The initial draft said that minor children were excluded. Neil and I are like, yes, this is no big deal. There's a couple other things that we don't love, but that's really the big one. Well, that was scrubbed before the first meeting even. And I think that publicly being out there, that was also, people latched onto that and were very happy about the exclusion of minor children. But then upon the advice of some septic folks, they took that out. And again, that is very concerning for our property owners who have been renting a certain way for a long time and have been following the rules that you cannot have any accommodations for small children. This counts babies. There's no exclusion for even, children in diapers. So again, you'll have a situation where one extra child could make this illegal to rent to those folks, which is a burden for these people. And the other one was privacy issues. The regulation called for the submission of names, ages, and addresses of every person who's going to be staying in the property. We felt that was a little excessive, especially for young children. Why do I have to submit the name, address, and age of my daughter? You need to know how many people in the property, sure, but that contract is with the person who rents, not with the minor children who are going to be staying in the home. So we felt that was a concern. And then enforcement. I had talked to the county. What is the practical how are you practically going to enforce these regulations? So somebody calls because they hate that there's an Airbnb next door or a rental, doesn't matter what kind of rental, Airbnb or not, but they really don't like it and they think there's too many people. When does this inspector come out and look? Are the cops going to be dispatched at 3 a.m. and counting heads in beds? We know that's not realistic, but how is that going to be enforced? And then if deterrence is really the main thing, where you're going to put these rules out there because you want to deter people, it's only going to be the people who are interested in following the rules anyway who are going to follow. So is it really going to change the balance of what we're seeing? We're not sure. We have concerns about that. So I think that there's obviously a lot to discuss, especially on the occupancy rules. It seems like that's really where the rub is for a lot of folks. And we are very interested in being part of the solution. We not only sell houses to people who are going to rent, but also people who are going to live there full time. So realtors hear both sides of the story. They certainly have people who own and are concerned about being surrounded by nothing but rentals. And then they sell to people who, the only way to financially make this investment work is if they can rent out their home. So certainly eager to hear from you all about what your experiences and thoughts are on these very, I know, challenging and sometimes controversial subjects.
Great. Thank you, Kim. As a reminder, you all have cards that you can write down questions if you have them. Abby will collect them and they'll somehow find their way here magically. Some have already done that. First question, I'm going to combine a couple of these cards, of course, is going to go to Travis. We see a lot of different regulation across the Commonwealth, across our little footprint, as well as the nation. One question is, do you think it should be a requirement that this be a primary residence, as it is that requirement in Fluvanna and Albemarle? Why or why not? And then what are you seeing across the nation? And are investors better or worse hosts than residing owners?
So there's not a one size fits all solution across the country. I mean, it's impossible to answer that. I am completely in it. There is a huge amount going back to the 2018, $30 billion, 2022, $63 billion industry. There's a lot of money sitting on the sidelines right now of investment that are looking to buy up properties in a lot of different markets. There's a lot of different municipalities that have been doing a really great job of preventing that from happening. But there is a couple of different ways that will actually take shape. There are companies like Sonder that'll go into Nashville, they'll buy up an apartment building and turn that into a vacation rental because it has hotel use by right. That actually exists already in the city of Charlottesville. It could happen, could be a good use for the Dewberry Hotel. Who knows? The regulations in regards to primary residence, I mean, I think it's just depends on where you are. I think that the way that the county has been handling it, specifically Albemarle, is I think they've been doing a great job as best as they possibly can. However, Leah brought up the LLCs. There's a 4-hour debate about an LLC in Albemarle County 2 weeks ago, and whether or not it was a primary use or not, because it was a LLC and the guy lives in New York. I personally don't think it should be subjected to political opinion, whether or not that person should have a permit. The ability is politically biased. However, the primary residence, I've seen it work really well. That being said, sorry, this is too much of a lengthy answer. But as Leah, we've worked very closely together in trying to help push forward responsibility. We definitely manage quite a few urban properties, including for a great real estate agent here in Charlottesville. We have a license agreement, as I've already mentioned, and then we have a good neighbor policy on the back door. It's a $500 fine if you violate our good neighbor policy. Guess what I do? I define that policy in my agreement, license agreement. I define it again on that back door. You know how many complaints we've had? 0, except for one time. Guess what? The owners were on their back porch at 11:30 being loud. And we got the call. There's nothing I can do. sorry, they own the actual property, and that's a legitimate 100% story. And so I think if you think as you're crafting legislation and you're using things like such as a good neighbor policy and fines, that can go directly to the municipality. That's the way it works in the city of Charlottesville, if you're not familiar with. But I mean, we have had 0 phone calls in 10 years. So I don't know if that helps answer.
That helps a great deal.
It's important to recognize too that there's such variation in markets, and Charlottesville looks a lot different from Lake Anna, looks a lot different from somewhere else. I was just in a meeting the other day, we were talking about Fauquier, and the proposal was talking about short-term rentals. Well, is it reasonable for the owner to have to be there and live on the property? Well, she said, yeah, in Fauquier County, we have all these carriage houses. That's what you rent out. We don't have carriage houses at Lake Anna. That's just not how it works. And most of those people are not, they're not primary, they're not going to live there. It's not their primary residence. We will be handicapping places like Lake Anna so severely if we look at something like that. Those areas thrive, the restaurants, the breweries that have opened, they will not be able to survive if you have that kind of regulation in that kind of area. Understand it's totally different in an urban setting where you're taking away housing stock, but just thought that was important to note.
Oh, just a quick note that we do not get complaints on the Stay Charlottesville properties, but that does not mean we do not get complaints.
That actually, I love it when a plan comes together. That's the next card. How many homestay complaints has Albemarle received, and who follows up on these complaints?
So I do not have a number today on the number of complaints. One of the things that's particular to Albemarle, well, it's not particular to Albemarle, actually, we're a growing contingent. We have joined the growing contingent that uses these. There is a third-party service that we use that actually scrapes all the listings from online platforms doing short-term rentals. And each of those listings, if they do not match up with the permit, becomes a complaint. So, so in our system, there are literally thousands, but a lot of them are not actual people complaints. As far as people complaining, I think we probably get 20 a year. And it's usually someone is calling in and they are noticing that their neighbors have license plates from New York and California and Utah in front of their house every single week. And they saw someone running through their backyard and lighting a fire in a dry season. So as far as actual complaints following up on, we do have a code compliance team, which I don't know how many of you know the inimitable Lisa Green, but she is a force of personality. She's in charge of our code compliance team in the county. And we have investigators who look into each one, particularly if there is a neighbor complaining, that is a higher priority, obviously, and reach out to the property owner. If need be, go out to the property to see what's happening, if it's an active complaint. We did have a fun time when we had a complaint come in for a large party house, and Lisa knocked on the door. And she went in and then a man opened the door and there's a little toddler next to him. And she says, hi, I got a complaint against your house. And the guy says, I don't live here. She's like, oh, well, who lives here? It's like, well, I don't know. I just rented it on Airbnb. I paid for the whole weekend. I don't have to leave, right? That's the kind of situation where there was actually a small wedding in the backyard. They had tents. They had balloons, they had caterers. Don't do that. Tell your clients not to do that. It'll make all of our lives easier.
In following up on that, the third-party scraping, I think it's Granicus that does that. Is that no? We use a different. All right. Has that been effective in identifying non-registered homestays? And what's the reaction from folks that have these non-registered homestays? Is it an education process? Are you just coming out with a violation? How does that work?
Absolutely, great question. So Harmari is extremely effective. There is a bit of a lag in the listings going on to the platforms and then them coming to us. There's about a 1 to 2 month lag for that, just because what Harmari does, and if anyone, Harmari, Harmari, yeah, it's a third-party company. So I don't know if anyone has worked with CoStar, but that was one of the places that I worked before I came to the county and did my degree in planning. And one of my jobs there was to find listings and match up photos of houses with photos of listings and find what the actual address of things were on sales receipts, on real estate listings. And that's essentially what Harmari does for us is, as Travis noted, Airbnb makes it very, very difficult to find an actual location. What people do is look at the photo that's on the Airbnb listing, go to Google Street View, look and see, is that photo what this house is? Oh, they painted the shutters, but it's still the same house. And then match up that and then give us the name of the person who owns that house. So that is why there's a little bit of a lag. And then the process of actually following up on the complaints is one of the code compliance team will reach out to the applicant, or not, sorry, the owner of the property. If they don't respond, they go out in person, leave cards, and if there's no response, then it can become a violation quickly. And it is, they get a letter, a notice of violation, formal registered mail, saying you have to come into compliance. And then usually at that point they do, because nobody likes registered mail. And then they fill out the application, go through the process, get registered, or have to cease operation. And for most people, it is an education, because most people, they have a house, they have no idea they even need to look into this, let alone pay taxes on it. I'm just renting out my house. I own it. It's my house. But it's actually a commercial business. It's you making money off of a property that you own in a commercial way. And so that's why we have all the TOT and all the sales tax, and we have the zoning compliance. So there are occasionally people who refuse, who shut the door and pull the curtains over the window when we come, and those people do get pulled into court. I think we've had one in the past 3 years, so it doesn't happen very often.
Great. The question has come up with regard to all the localities in Central Virginia and the existence or non-existence of a registry. What I'm seeing for most of the state is a movement toward registries in general. And we, as an organization, have been very supportive of the idea of a simple registry and the idea of paying TOT. This is a level playing field, and we have been very supportive of that. Right now, there is not a registry in Fluvanna. I believe the spreadsheet says yes and no for registries, but it is a question that comes up a lot. I actually don't think registries are bad in general. Sometimes what they require may prove to be problematic in additional information. I have a question here for Kim. Kim, you mentioned your parents' house at the lake, which are full-time residents. How many, like a percentage of the now Lake Anna homes are part-time residents, part-time STR, or full STR? And what percentage would be full-time residents in your opinion? I know that's not statistically accurate, but just you're there all the time.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would also defer to the county, since we have someone here from the county. I that's a pretty high percentage, especially if they're lakefront houses. I think a lot of lakefront people do, and water access folks do rent because they have that access to the lake. On my parents' street, there's probably 15 houses. I think 3 are full-time residents at this point. A lot of them come down regularly, though. There are a lot of people who do not rent their home, but come down on a regular basis. Family members come down, friends come down. But there's a lot of renting going on. And I think if you just pull up Airbnb or VRBO or any of those, and just, we were talking about, there was the Vacasa article in the paper lately, that Lake Anna is one of the best investments around because it's becoming even more popular for short-term rentals. And it's obviously a beautiful place to be.
This next one's for Travis. What are the key factors for owners to have business success in the short-term rental market? It's an easy question.
Somewhat. So first is the best way to have success is to actually check all of your boxes and make sure that you are legal and that you can get a license. That would be very appreciative from my standpoint. But in real estate, at least as I talk to when people inquire with us, you guys say location, location, location. I say location, then I say bones of the property, what makes it unique, and then I say, how did you decorate it? And then the last question that I don't ever tell them is, do I ever want to work with you? And so if you're, that would be, there is a trend in I don't think cookie cutter works very well, but there is a huge trend. And there's a gentleman you guys can look at, it's called purpose-built homes. This market does not actually do that, that I know of anywhere thus far. There's a group that's actually trying to do it within Nelson County. But purpose-built homes are actually designed to be vacation rentals. They have a much larger yield. And that could be a growing popularity piece.
Great. The next question is for Leah. This is twofold. One, can you explain the various housing types that are allowed in Albemarle County to have homestays? And remind folks with how the HOA interacts with the county regulations.
Sure. So as the question kind of hints at, homestays are limited in the type of properties they can be done in. Homestays are only permitted in the county in single family detached dwellings. And so what that means is that if you are in a townhouse, if you are in a condo apartment building, then if you're in a over under duplex, those are not permitted to have homestays. And that's just concern for the neighbors, really. And the difference with, and this is a rural area versus residential district, and also in the rural area, I do need to clarify that there's rural area small properties, which are the 2 acre properties, the smaller historic 1 acre that you get down in like the Crozet area or near any of the crossroads. Then there are the properties that are over 5 acres in size, and that's anywhere from 5 acres to 500 acres. And those two are treated differently. On the smaller properties, the short-term rental needs to be within the actual structure, and that's a building code definition where the structure is the walls that are all touching each other. And that's it. On smaller properties. On a larger property, if you have a guest cottage, if you have a detached garage, if you have a pool house, you can have it in that structure as well. But that is one of the differences between the smaller properties, residential neighborhoods, and then also the larger rural area properties. And I forget what the second part was. HOAs. HOAs are private agreements between individual citizens. So HOAs are something that the county does not really touch on. There are so many HOAs, they all do things differently, and we have no jurisdiction to enforce or even know what the HOA regulations are in all the neighborhoods. So I do definitely caution people when they're thinking about doing a homestay, read your HOA regulations. Make sure that your HOA does not outlaw this. Many of them do, if not all of them. There are very strict regulations. Sometimes they don't even allow home businesses. So technically people who are working from home full-time now, technically they're not allowed to be doing that in some of these HOAs. So read your HOA regulations. I can't tell you what they are, but you can.
And again, to add to that, even if it doesn't explicitly say less than 30-day rentals, it generally in the back of most of the docs that I've read, you cannot license the use of your property and therefore you are in violation.
And there is right now no clearinghouse for that information because HOA regs change often enough that there right now is no one collecting that data. And it would be a challenge to collect, but it is whenever you have a client looking at anything that they want to do with a property in an HOA or POA neighborhood, it's critical to review those documents. Kim, a question for you. Do you know of anybody in the state that is assessing the economic opportunity costs regarding regulation versus less regulation on short-term rental? And do you think that the level of regulation is hindering short-term rentals in those areas that are highly regulated?
So for us, where we are in Spotsylvania, Louisiana, no. I mean, there's not any economic studies that we know of. That's a great idea and something that we have thought about. On the wider scale, that's a great question that I don't feel qualified to answer. We don't deal with very many short-term rentals. We do represent the city of Fredericksburg, which is a lovely city. If anybody wants to come to town, we'd love to have you all. We have a wonderful association building not far from there. We'd love to see you. But we don't have a lot of short-term rentals in downtown Fredericksburg either. Actually, that was a very surprising no fight kind of thing that we did in the city. They have a registry. There's been a few places that have gotten on it and it's gone very smoothly, but it's not a high demand short-term rental area. We have a couple of really great small hotels and that's pretty much it. So that's a great question. And I think I would defer to Travis and you deal with more of them on a national level.
So the state of Arizona is probably the only state that a couple of years back, that I want to say it was 2017, blanketed the entire area and said, we're pulling back the power from the localities. It was too divisive, and said, hey, you can do a vacation rental. You can't, here's our property rights. These are the rules. However, this year they're starting to pull back on that and try to get power back to the localities. And so really the data that's about to start coming out, Arizona will be the first state that's really going to have the impact studies.
Great. Leah, the question for you is, this is one that I get in trouble for asking her. Is there any evidence that the short-term, thanks guys for this, that the short-term rental regs are achieving the board's desired goals?
As far as compliance, absolutely. We have had an 80% increase in compliance over the past 3 years. And a lot of this is what Neil hinted at earlier, was that people didn't know. They didn't know that they were doing anything that wasn't regulated. They didn't realize that. And then most people are perfectly willing to, well, they grumble a little bit, but then they're perfectly willing to fill out the applications and make sure that the regulations are followed, and then pay the TOT, because a lot of the platforms collect it anyway, or they collect some kind of taxation. As far as the goals of preserving housing in the county, we don't really have any way to know that because we haven't allowed it full scale. The county came out ahead of a lot of the demand, and I think that is something that was a little bit long-term view, getting out ahead of the problems before they became a problem. And so we haven't really had a lot of neighborhoods turning over. We have had a lot of people come out in the last couple of years to register to start doing this, these rentals, where even before they didn't have any interest in doing it. But then as Travis mentioned, COVID, people realize that people want to come out, they want to have somewhere to work, they want to have somewhere to vacation that isn't in a hotel, that you don't have to pass the people in the hallway. And so I think that it's yes and maybe, we don't know. We can't prove a negative, I think is the scientific term.
Fair enough. There's been some talk by some in the legislative circles, policy wonk folks, about the idea of a statewide regulation on short-term rentals. I'm interested because I see problems from locality to locality, but I also see the lake, for instance, being a very different market than downtown Charlottesville. Question for you, how many folks out here actually operate an Airbnb or a short-term rental? I thought there were a few, yeah. And how many of you have stayed in a short-term rental anywhere at any time? Yeah, that's kind of what I thought too. But could you speak to the idea of how that could or couldn't work a statewide ordinance?
I would love to. Different question, show of hands. How many of you have been to Outer Banks? Awesome. And how would you guys like it if you couldn't go take your family to Outer Banks and you had to stay in a hotel? Need I say more? I think that we're talking about Lake Anna, Wintergreen Resort. There's 1,700 homes up at Wintergreen Resort. It will never be predominantly primary use residency. And so I think it's up, as I said earlier, it's a not one size fits all approach. It needs to be handled responsibly via each governing body. I do get shocked though that there are incredible resources available that have studied this. There is a group called Rent Responsibly, and they have a huge amount of data that is specific to individual localities. I often say this to various localities that I'm working with, and somehow no one ever reaches out. I think data is actually important, and I'm not sure that the state getting involved outside of a registry, which in Hawaii, if you're familiar with, they have a registry for every single property is required for an OTA, which means online travel agency, which is what VRBO is, Airbnb is, kayak.com, yada, yada, yada. Every individual property has to have the state license number on the listing to make their job easier and to make sure that the tax collection is responsible. I would be a huge advocate and scream from the top of the mountain for that one.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be impossible to craft something meaningful that encompasses all the different needs. Albemarle has a very different response than Louisa County, than Spotsylvania County, as it should. And there are so many, we were just talking about Richmond. I mean, that's a real concern of investors buying up affordable properties and turning them into weekly rentals. That is such a different situation than we have at the lake. It seems nearly impossible that the state could possibly get it right and not end up making things worse for some jurisdictions.
I probably agree. It's doubtful the state will get it right. Another question for Leah that I really thank you guys for asking me to ask her, because it's putting her on the spot in a way that she doesn't really deserve. What's the future of short-term rental in Albemarle County?
Who has a magic 8-ball?
I think I can help you answer that because I know you can't be on the spot on that, if you don't mind.
All I can say is that I think that we are still evolving, and I think that in a lot of times government is the ship that has to turn 5 miles before it hits the iceberg. In order for anything to change, it takes multiple years to start that change even happening. And we are still getting into our spot in Virginia as a tourism dominated county. And I think that's something that we are slowly reacting to.
I think the future could be quite bright with proper advocacy from this group as well as others, and making sure that her job is easier by not having to file complaints and having the board of supervisors hear about it. The squeakiest wheel is usually the one that is going to help craft legislation. And if those complaints go down, if compliance goes up, and the neighbors don't have to be mad, it'll look awesome. But if we currently, if I have friends in this space that buy properties and they tell me that what they're going to do with the properties, including having weddings, and I'm like, absolutely not. And they still try to go do that. And so making sure you as real estate agents know that all the rules that apply, and making sure before you tell anybody they're going to do a vacation rental or a wedding venue or whatever it might be, you know what those rules are. I think that would be crucial. One of the things that Lee and I are trying to do together so that we can both minimize the amount of phone calls that we take is help craft different the various policies of the localities to make it easily accessible for you guys as well as the people who are inquiring with us.
Great. As we wrap up, I got a question here about the Free Enterprise Forum. Just want to say that if you aren't following the Free Enterprise Forum blog, go to freeenterpriseforum.org and click on the right button and you can subscribe to it. It's free. You'll get an email every time a blog comes up and you can delete it and I'll never know. There's also the opportunity on the website to donate to the Free Enterprise Forum. And I thank you for that. I want to thank you guys for a very vibrant conversation, and thanks for all these tough questions I got to read. And our panelists will stick around for the next 10 or 15 minutes if you have questions, but let's thank our panel for the time. Thank you all.